Welcome to Becoming Parents podcast. I'm your host, Jen Taylor Campbell. I'm a birth and bereavement doula, as well as an adoption and surrogacy doula. Doula means woman who serves. And although I love happy births, adoptions, and surrogacy, the pro bono part of my business is in bereavement. I'm here to help you. I'm also mom of 18 children, with over 30 years experience in the trenches as a mom myself. We have a huge blended family, and I've also experienced the loss of our adult son. Remember, give a shout out to those brave enough to share their stories on how they have become parents. Let's dive in. Welcome to Becoming Parents podcast. I'm your host, Jen Taylor Campbell. Today, I'm really excited to have on Samantha Radford. How are you, Samantha?
Hey, Jen, I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm good. So we met in a really interesting way, and I kind of want to start out there. I usually don't start out with that stuff. We haven't met in person, but we met online. So you stalked me. Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I a little, kind of, yeah.
And then I stalked you back. So talk about how you and I connected, because it's directly related to your business, and we're going to kind of weave that into everything today.
It is. So 2 years ago, I started an online event called Breastfeeding Beyond Babyhood. And I'll talk lots more about it later, I'm sure, but it's all about helping parents with breastfeeding or chest feeding beyond the first year. And so I really wanted to connect with both, people in the online space, which I've known how to do in the past because that's where I am. Yeah. But I also wanted to work with breastfeeding advocacy groups that are on the ground, local, doing things in their own community. And so, yes, I stalked Jen because you run the Northern Nevada Breastfeeding Coalition. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm the vice president of the Northern Nevada Breastfeeding Coalition, and the president is great. I am much more, she's quiet and sweet. And I am not quiet and sweet. So I'm much more out in the community and doing things and advocating, and I'm much more visible, I guess, online. So you reached out to me, and that's the weird thing with spam and just people reaching out, because I get several a week,
oh, I'm sure.
People reaching out, and I actually read every single one of the emails and contacts that I get, because you have to differentiate what is spam or something you're not interested in and be polite about it, and then also the opposite, what you are interested in and what would be a great idea. And I think both those things are equally important instead of just being dismissive. And so I was really excited about your platform, and we met on this big group meeting, and it was awesome. And I was like, you need to be on my podcast. So that is how we connected, and we are going to be talking more about this. But we chatted. I think I said this in the meeting, but if not, I say it often on the podcast. Almost 100% of people that I interview are entrepreneurs, and that was not intentional, but I'm glad that that's who I attract, because it's kind of who I am. It is who I am. Mm-hmm. And 100% of entrepreneurs birth their business from their own struggle. And our goal is, we get through something really hard and we figure it all out. And our goal is to make it faster, easier, and more supported for other people. And I'm guessing, yeah, okay.
that all sounds 100%. Very, yes.
So let's catch people up on your parenting journey, because that kind of, I'm guessing, goes right into your entrepreneurship journey.
It sure does. So I'll start with before becoming a parent. So I was always, how when you're in your early to mid 20s, people just assume you must want children. And so they hand you the baby because, babies are cute and you should have them. And so I was an only child. I was very rarely around small children, and I was scared of babies. I was not that person. So when people would hand me a baby, he or she would start crying, and I'd be like, I don't know what to do. I didn't have any interest in having kids, I'll be honest, at the time. Right. And so, like I said, mid 20s, I was in graduate school. So my background, actually, I have a PhD in chemistry, specifically in exposure science. And so what exposure science is it's basically the combination of chemistry and public health. So you're looking at all the different toxic chemicals out there in the world, We look at how we're exposed to them. Is it in our food? Is it in the air we breathe? Is it even something that we can get on our skin and then gets absorbed into our body? And then from there, once we're exposed to these chemicals, how do they distribute through our body and how do they affect us? And, with us talking about distribution, a lot of times that can happen. Like if a woman is pregnant, these chemicals can get to their baby. And then once they're breastfeeding, that's another way that these chemicals can get to their baby. Granted, these chemicals can get to your baby from formula too. So that's not like a slam against breastfeeding. It's just true. And so a lot of my studies, even though I wasn't interested in children at the time, a lot of what I did had a lot to do with women of childbearing age and, you know, developing babies in the womb and babies, like young toddlers. So I looked a lot at like baby food or at fruit juices. I had a colleague who developed a method for testing breast milk for particular chemicals. So all these different things, I was surrounded by it, even though like it was not my personal world. And so I graduated with that PhD in 2012. I started teaching that first year at a local college, and then I became pregnant. And like I
Oops.
said, at first I was, yeah, I know. Yeah, that's a whole story. My husband really wanted kids, and I was very ambivalent about it. And, anyways, there we were. And I was terrified at first. Even I was in the hospital, and with that first birth, I had an epidural, and the nurse told me, she was like, "It's time to push." And I started crying, and I was like, "You don't understand. I can't have a baby. I don't like babies." And so she
Oh.
and so she just kinda looked at me and she's like, "I'll give you a minute," and just walked out of the room. Um, Obviously, I did have her, like, there was no stopping it at that point, but I fell head over heels in love with my daughter, so
Oh.
that was 9.5 years ago, and I loved her, and I loved it, and I loved breastfeeding, and then ultimately, I ended up having 3 more kids, so it's like the Lay's potato chip, can't just have 1. Um
That's so good though. I mean, thank you for being
Yeah.
so honest about the fact that you didn't want kids. You married somebody who
Mhm,
did. That was not in your
mhm.
plan. You're very logic based, I think. Um,
Yes, yeah.
yeah. And it just didn't make sense. And then even at the point where you were being told to push, you were like, yeah, this is real. I just don't want to sign up for this. Because I think a lot of women feel guilt and shame if it's not like, I'm ready, I want these kids and it's gonna be great. Right. But you weren't like
Oh,
that. And thank you
absolutely.
for sharing that. That's awesome. So, but you fell in
Yeah,
love. So that's good.
I did, and that took a day or 2, like, the falling in love. Like, the first day, I felt very like, "This is my baby," but it didn't have, like, the emotion behind it. But I remember the second night, I was sitting with her in our little rocking chair, and I managed to latch her all by myself. So proud because, the first little bit where you've got, like, your husband holding her head and you holding your boob and, like, the whole thing. But I got her latched by myself, and I just felt this wash. It must have been like the oxytocin, but I just felt this wash of, like, I literally felt myself fall in love with her, and it was the most amazing thing. I'm getting goosebumps now talking about it.
Mm,
But yeah, that can take time, and that's something that, people have a hard time admitting, feeling that guilt and shame like you said.
yeah.
So,
How great. So you decided to breastfeed. And
yes.
how was that journey? Did it go pretty well?
It went really smoothly for me, which I'm so grateful for. At least like for the first, I had a really easy time starting. I had a friend who gave me a copy of The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding from La
Yeah.
Leche League.
Yeah.
And so maybe a month or so before my little girl was born, I read it cover to cover because, like you said, logic, like that's just the kind of
Yep.
girl I am. And every time that I got to like a new, time period, I would go back and reread that next section. And so like I kind of knew to expect, okay, I guess I just won't sleep anymore and,
Ever.
try to take naps and ever. Yes, 10 years later. um I knew like but I ended up having an easy time latching. She didn't really have issues. The only little hiccup we had was she was still sleepy when she was
Mhm.
very first born, but I'd read about and watched a video about how to express my own colostrum and give it to her with a spoon. So, I mean, that was like the only issue I ever had there. So,
That's awesome.
so like I said, I was teaching down south at the time, down in Georgia, but it was a temporary position. And so I was able to stay an extra year because during that time, I was pregnant, having a baby and all that. Um, but when my baby just turned a year old, we moved up to Pennsylvania, which is where we are now, so that I could get like a full-time long-term position up here. So I was tenure track. And if you're in academia, like basically that just means that it's almost like you're in a trial position for like 5 or 6 years,
Mhm. It's
we'll just
weird.
say.
It's so odd.
It's so weird.
Yeah.
It's so weird. So, like, there's all these hoops and all of that, but also, like, that's exactly the time when women are starting their families, and that's a whole thing we could talk about, but we'll leave that alone. So, I got up here, um, not too long after I started, my first year of teaching up here in Pennsylvania, I became pregnant again, with my second daughter. And it was hard because we were up here all alone. So all of our family was still down south at the time. Um, it was apparently the coldest winter they've had in this area in like 25 years. And we were already coming from Georgia, and we were like up the mountain so that, instead of the valley. So like the weather was just miserable. Um, I had a really hard time, like
Yeah.
emotionally. It was tough because, you've got the pregnancy hormones on top of all that. Um, but like I said, that's a pretty short time span. So my little girl, my oldest, was only a little bit past 1 whenever I got pregnant with her. So I knew that the World Health Organization suggested that you continue breastfeeding, up to 2 years. And I checked into, because like I said, the scientist, like I want to make sure that I'm doing things like safely. So I checked into whether or not you could continue nursing while pregnant. And what I found is that under pretty much all circumstances, with a few exceptions, you can. So I continued breastfeeding her. Um, but it got to where once I was probably like 4 or 5 months pregnant, something about it just like bugged me. Like I felt very touched out and very like, "Ooh, don't touch me."
Mhm.
And I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know that was a possibility. And there was a lot of like back to, that guilt and shame we talked about. Because I was like, I know that breastfeeding her is a good thing to do. And it's something like mentally I really want to do, but it just bugs the crap out of me. And just makes my skin crawl. Like I just could tear my skin off. Like I wished it had hurt, because if it had hurt, like you know how to handle pain, but it didn't. It just felt icky. And like, your kid's not supposed to make you feel icky. And so that was a struggle, but I, kept breastfeeding through it. Her sister was born when she was 23 months old. So I was still nursing her. So I had a toddler and a newborn, and they were both nursing. And it wasn't always like that. Like it wasn't always that skin crawling sensation that I've eventually found out is called nursing aversion. This is like a real thing that happens to people. Um, but when I did have the nursing aversion, it would only be for my toddler. It wouldn't happen with the
Mm.
newborn, which is, again, that's a common thing with people who are tandem nursing, like that they only experience nursing aversion with the older child. Um, Ultimately, once once the baby, my second, was about 7 months old, so my little girl was about 2.5,
Mhm.
I did wean her and continue nursing, my infant, which was really tough. It was tough for me and for her, but we made that work. Um, and after that, really, probably not even 6 months after that, I ended up being pregnant again with my third.
There's a
And so
pattern
that
here.
time there is a pattern.
Yeah.
You'd think we'd figure it out. But um anyways, I continued nursing my second, and my third was born, and I tandem nursed the two of them for probably about a year. And I had a much easier time
Okay.
that time around. So I still experienced some nursing aversion, but A, it wasn't nearly to the degree. And B, like I found a lot of tools to help me with it. So for one thing, I started seeing a therapist, um, which helped a lot. I did prenatal yoga to help me with the birth of my third child, of my son. And because I really wanted to do that one without an epidural. The
Mhm.
second one came without an epidural, but I was not ready for it, and there was a lot of screaming and freaking out. So anyways, I was doing prenatal yoga, and I was learning a lot of mindfulness and a lot of, being present and just kind of like feeling what's going on with you. So then whenever I was rocking my toddler to sleep, who's now like the second one, right? Instead of being all mad and being like, "Oh my gosh, when is this kid going to go to sleep? She's going to take forever," and getting all tense and stressed out. Like I learned how to, sit there and settle, feel my feet on the ground, feel, her little head in one hand and feel her little bottom, tucked up in my elbow, and just like be present. And that really helped me relax with her and not get so worked up, and helped, decrease the aversion. Plus things like taking a magnesium supplement, staying hydrated, all those other things helped me with it. So I had a much better experience the second time around. So
There's a difference between breast aversion and D-MER, and if anyone listening is
yes.
in this space, so D-MER's basically, it's an emotional response that happens just seconds before your milk lets down. It's attached to the milk ejection reflex, but where you
Mhm.
feel that emotional drop that, and it usually only lasts for a few minutes, and but it can be, I mean, there's difference in severity with both of these things. So I just want to clarify that, because just in case there's confusion or people have heard of
Mhm.
D-MER but not breastfeeding aversion. And basically, it's like these negative emotions where you kind of feel like your skin's crawling. And I tandem nursed 4 times. I had to go back and think about it and count.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah, but and I never had issues with breastfeeding
Oh
aversion
good.
at all, which is great.
That's
It's
great.
not, I want women to know that it's common and okay for either of these things to happen, but it
Yes.
doesn't need to. It's like anything else. I mean, it is
Yeah, yeah.
a hormonal and emotional reaction. Okay, so you're pregnant with 3 and that went better. And then the third birth, did the third
Yes.
birth go better?
The third birth went really well. That could be a whole, like what I said is that I feel like the second birth happened to me, but like I did the third birth,
Ah, what a
like I
great way to put it. Okay.
so great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um and with when I was pregnant with the fourth one, the second one weaned during pregnancy on his own. So I didn't end up tandeming like a third time, but
Okay.
I did breastfeed during pregnancy some with that one.
Incredible. And as your pregnancies progressed, you had less breastfeeding aversion. So was it less with that third pregnancy and then less with the fourth pregnancy?
I think so. Yeah. So with the last one, I mean, the aversion was worse with when like the baby was actually born than it was during pregnancy itself,
Got it.
So I didn't, but yeah, I think like as I got more skills and just more experience, like, learning that after 3 kids, like, yeah, they do eventually go to sleep, or whatever it is that triggers you, that you panic, like it's never going to happen, I think that
Yes.
helped too.
And I think that's
Just,
normal because when you're in the moment, it's overwhelming, and it's 100% overwhelming in the moment, even
oh
though
yeah.
a month later, maybe you figured like, oh no, it's fine. This does happen. They do eventually sleep.
Or like you forgot that it even happened,
Right.
because it's over. Like when, a lot of times 4 month olds all of a sudden are more aware of the world around them. Like La Leche League calls it 4 month fussies. It's hard to get them to nurse because they're looking around and doing stuff and all that. but then after a couple weeks, they get over it, and you like, even though you were super panicked about it at that moment, you forget it was a thing.
When I was a lactation consultant and breastfeeding counselor for years. And I remember like people are like, well, the baby's fussy. And I don't know, is it something I'm eating? And always try to tell moms, by the time you figure it out, if you figure it out, it's going to be over.
It'll be something different, if anything.
Realistically, right? Like you've moved on because like
Yeah.
you said, it's really intense in that moment, but then within a week, it's either something different or it's cleared up on its own. If it's something consistent over time, we really need to look at that. Like go ahead and track what you're eating just in case there's some sort of allergy. But like
Mhm.
statistically, it's just you will never figure out what's going on with the baby and you just never will. So you just kind of power
Right.
through, right? So you're a PhD working in Pennsylvania. Do you still do that?
Yes. So I taught for eight, 8 years up here. Well, 8 years total. So 6 up here. Um, right before all the stuff happened in 2020, there became like some financial issues at the university I was at.
Okay.
So I ended up, they let me go. So speaking of weird things about universities, whenever they fire you, they don't just like let you go or give you your 2 weeks notice or whatever. They give you what they call a terminal contract. So you get to work there for like a year longer, like knowing that you're fired, which um one, the idea is, that way you have a chance to use the next cycle to find a new job, but it's also just soul crushing.
Yes. Yes.
um but as it turned out, so I got that notice like spring of 2019, and soon thereafter got pregnant one more time with the fourth child. So it actually worked out really nicely because so I taught for that fall of 2019,
Okay.
ginormously pregnant at the end. Had my baby January 3rd, and so I ended up having that last semester as maternity leave, and that allowed me to like, that's when all the shutdown stuff happened. So I
Yeah.
had colleagues, former colleagues, who were like trying to figure out how to teach lab to kids at their kitchen sink with like baking soda and vinegar, and how do we do all that. So I got to miss all that struggle. So I was really grateful for that. And I started my website, Evidence Based Mommy, in 2018, kind of when
Okay.
I saw all these financial things. I was like, maybe I should have another plan. And it's good that I did.
Yeah, it is. And none of us knew that the pandemic was coming or going to happen or how
I
bad it
know.
would be or
Yeah.
how long. So the fact that that all kind of lined up for you is awesome. But you'd already, I mean, you have the background in science, clearly a very strong
Hmm.
background. And then on top of
Hmm.
that, you had your own personal experience. I love when science and experience come together. It's such a party. That's so great.
Yes.
So let's jump in there. How did you, when you started it, what was your goal? Because it's
Hmm.
5 years now. You've had evidence-based bombing for
Yeah,
5 years now, which is amazing. And it's your
it is.
full-time thing. That's amazing. Yay. Good
It is
job.
amazing. I know. It's so exciting.
So
Yeah.
you
So, I mean,
started that. So take us through that.
okay. So, like I said, things were getting weird at my university. But at the same time, I wanted to be able, because I feel like a lot of times those who are in the science field, they like to just kind of talk to each other,
Okay.
but they're often not very good at taking what they're learning and what they're doing and providing that to the outside world. So, I know all these nitty gritty details about the specific pesticides and how they break down in like orange juice or grape juice or whatever, and how much people are going to be exposed to through drinking it. But like, how do I interpret that to like, does that mean that a parent's going to freak out and be like, I should never let my kid have grape juice again, or like, you know
Yep.
or all that kind of stuff. Or there's chemicals and everything is made of chemicals. Like, when do you actually worry about it, and choose a particular product. Like, for example, when should you buy organic food? Should every single thing you buy be organic food? But of course, a lot of people can't afford that. Like, I can't afford to buy only organic food, you know, because it's expensive. Or are there some foods that, like, it's okay to buy the conventional produce, is what we call it. So just kind of thinking through that. Another big thing that I focused on as a professor, and I had my students doing service projects around this, is in older housing, like anything built before 1978, there's a really good chance that there's lead in there. And so how do you deal with the lead? Like, do you try to scrub it all off your walls? Please don't do that. Because that makes it worse. Or do you repaint over it? Or do you even think about it? Like, because lead has really long-term impacts. This was coming off of the thing in Flint, Michigan, the water crisis there. People assume that lead must be a problem with water, but it's not, except for in that, really awful situation. Like, it's usually more in housing, like in old paint and stuff. So I always had a thing for, like, how can people apply, like, how can I apply what I'm learning to actually help people? And it's kind of hard to do that because even with, like I said, I was doing those service projects with students in the university. Lead, for example, like, isn't sexy because, we learned that lead was bad for us like decades ago. We learned that we should remove it from our gasoline, like 20 or 30 years ago. We learned that we should take it out of our paint however many years ago. So people have this mindset of, oh, that's all been done. Like, why are you still doing that research? And it's like, but there are still people suffering from it, But if it's not like a novel chemical, you don't really get the same credit for trying to help with it. So I wanted to be able to help parents where they are.
which is amazing. So you took all of the struggles or the questions or the things that are sort of unanswered or stressors for parents with their environment and their kids and tried to make a place where those things, sexy or not, were discussed and you gave information on it.
Yeah, that's a good way. So, my tagline is that I combine science and wellness to help moms and kids thrive. So, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
So, whether it's talking about, non-toxic stuff or about breastfeeding, and I particularly, there's a whole bunch of websites out there, which is fantastic. There should be more, that speak a lot about those early days of breastfeeding, looking for, like, oh, my baby's not latching, or, oh, is my supply okay? All that kind of stuff. But I saw a lot less out there about things like nursing aversion or, tandem nursing, or can I still get pregnant while I'm breastfeeding? Like, all those things that tend to crop up later.
Right.
And so I tried to kind of focus on that too. And, I could go into the literature, like the academic literature, and find like what research actually says about, is this true or not? So I always try to do that too on my more informational articles.
And you're reading the stuff that my brain doesn't want to read.
That's what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
Yes.
And then, like, digesting it, like trying to give the nuances, because a lot of the things, there's always nuance. Like, we like to hear just like, no, never do X, or yes, you always have to do Y, but that's really not what science says, like, ever. So trying to communicate that in a way that's helpful and clear for people. That's my goal.
And I loved that because you're right. There are so many ways you can ask for help or advocate for help in all of those beginning conversations. But yeah, I mean, I think because I was a breastfeeding counselor for so long, like, I knew what tandem nursing was. I'm curious how I would have responded if I hadn't made that what I did
Mhm.
and hadn't been exposed to information, because it doesn't seem normal, right? And anytime you're a mom doing something that doesn't seem normal or fits in the box, or you don't have a way to easily explain it to other people and other people are critical, then it becomes uncomfortable. And I don't know how I would have reacted had it not been like I was surrounded by all of that information. So tandem nursing was a normal thing in my mind. but I knew it wasn't for most people. So I love that you're focusing on that stuff later when we don't stop having questions as parents ever. Like
Right.
ever.
Yeah.
Um
I have so many questions right now.
There's
So
so
for my
many
own kid.
questions. Yeah,
Yeah.
right? And so, and
Yeah.
then what? And then what do you do? And you created the, and then what? Oh, this is what? This is a place to come. I want to kind of wrap up because we met with you contacting me and it became more than your original contact. And I always love when I meet my best friends this way.
Yay.
Where
Yes.
you were looking for support from businesses, and for me it was the Northern Nevada Breastfeeding Coalition, to
Mhm.
support, to help get word out. It wasn't even like, hey, support us financially and give me money. It was like, hey, can you help just share this information on your platform so more women can sign up that they want to? And oh, by the way, it's free for them to do that. I love that they can upgrade to a VIP pass and ticket, and I love that option, but they're not excluded by a payment. And I remember
Absolutely.
being a single mom, and I remember being a young mom, and I couldn't always do things if it was based off of me using my credit card. And so this is free and has a VIP option to sign up. And obviously the Northern Nevada Breastfeeding Coalition is supporting it. Um, but let's talk to me about that, how long that's been going on and what that entails, and kind of how people can get that information to sign up for the event that you have coming up.
Sure. Yeah. So, like I said, I started Breastfeeding Beyond, but no, I started Evidence Based Mommy in 2018. And so, it took a few years just to figure out, I'm still figuring out what I'm doing. But I mean, I started my website literally by Googling, like, how do you start a blog? Which, by the way, is not the way that I suggest starting a
Me
blog, but
either.
we made it work. So after I'd been doing that for a couple of years, I heard about the power of being able to get together like experts, worldwide experts, across the world, um, to do online events where you can get people together and help them, with like a really specific need that they have. And I was like, I would love to do something like that, for nursing past the first year. Cause like I said, there's all those things that people assume that either you know exactly what you're doing by the time you've breastfed for 9 months, a year, or whatever, or they assume, well, that's just stupid. You should wean anyways, which obviously is not the case, but the support's not there a lot of times. So and I knew these people were out there, like I said, especially in the online space, because that's where I am. So, in 2021, I founded Breastfeeding Beyond Babyhood, and the goal there is to support and celebrate people breastfeeding, chest feeding past the first year, no matter what their goals are. Because, like I said, some of them you might be kind of just at the edge of like your baby's 9 months, your baby's 18 months, and you have, your sister in law pressuring you, like, you need to wean, that you're just doing that for yourself, or like stuff like that. And so you need reassurance that, like, no, actually, this is good for me and my child, and I'm going to continue doing this, and you can go fly a kite. Um, but at the same time, there are other parents who are like, I'm exhausted and I'm dealing with, these creepy crawly feelings that I don't know what this is. And I want to stop nursing. And it's been, however many years, but I feel really guilty about it. And like, those people need reassurance. Like, you can still have a relationship with your child and set boundaries with them, and that's okay. So I want to help people kind of, no matter what their needs are, with continuing to breastfeed or kind of learning how to set those limits so they can start the process of weaning or whatever. And I've forgotten the question, but I hope that answers it.
That's my
So,
favorite. Yeah, it was just, how did this get going? And I'm glad you clarified it's two different websites. I know when we were first emailing
yes.
back and forth, I didn't realize that you and Evidence Based were the same thing. And then when I figured out, I was like, oh, I get it all. So you're more than one
Okay.
thing. Yeah, and I figured it out really
Yeah.
quickly. But the Evidence Based Mommy and this symposium are the same person doing things in a different way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Evidence Based Mommy is like the, standing website that has all my blog stuff, like tons of stuff. And then Breastfeeding Beyond Babyhood takes place annually. So it has its own little site that right now just kind of has a coming soon page that you can get on the wait list if you want. But we'll be opening registration up on April 10th for that.
Awesome. Samantha, thank
Hmm.
you so much for sharing your experience. What I just loved the way you present your story and your honesty. It's been really amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved it.